Kansas, May 1888. The sky turned green before the wind screamed. Hollis Fairburn was halfway through pulling a pie from the wood-burning oven when the storm hit. The window rattled once, then the front door slammed open so hard it cracked the wall behind it. She froze, pie in hand, as the wind howled through her small clapboard home. The sky beyond the porch had gone the color of old bruises, and the air tasted like metal. She set the pie down without a word, grabbed her satchel, and ran. She did not know the child's name. Only that the girl was maybe 6, and her mother had not come back for her. 3 days ago, a desperate man had ridden into town with his fevered wife slumped over his saddle. The woman had died by morning. Her child, left behind at a claim 2 miles west, had not been seen since. Only rumor and guilt had kept the story alive. Hollis had not stopped thinking about the girl since. Now, with the sky boiling and the wind tearing fence posts from the ground, Hollis knew waiting any longer meant death. She shoved her satchel over her shoulder, braced her coat against the wind, and bolted for the stable. The storm did not wait for her. By the time she reached the claim house, the tornado had already dropped from the clouds like a monster's tail. It tore across the prairie in a wide black column, flinging trees and shingles into the air like toys. The shack was barely standing. Hollis kicked the door in. "Hello," she yelled, coughing through the dust. "Is anyone here?" A high-pitched whimper answered from under the floorboards. She dropped to her knees. "It's all right? I'm here to help you." A moment later, a pair of wide blue eyes blinked up at her from a loose slat. Hollis reached down and pulled the girl into her arms. The child clung to her like she had always belonged there. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Hollis asked, carrying her toward the door. "Heidi," the girl whispered. The wind screamed louder, and Hollis looked up. The tornado was coming straight for them. She wrapped Heidi in her coat, ducked her head, and ran. They made it 50 yards before the shack behind them exploded into splinters. Hollis threw herself over the child and rolled into a dry gully just as the funnel passed half a mile north, tearing a barn to pieces. Dirt filled her mouth, her ears, her eyes. She held the girl close, praying the wind would not lift them next. Then it passed. The sky calmed like a tantrum spent. And when Hollis finally lifted her head, she saw a man on horseback watching them from the ridge. He rode down slow, dust clinging to his coat, hat pulled low over dark eyes. He looked like he had ridden through hell to get here. "You all right?" he asked, voice rough with concern. Hollis nodded, still cradling Heidi. She was alone in that house. I could not leave her. The man's gaze dropped to the child, then back to Hollis. There was something in that look, quiet awe. "I saw you run into it," he said. "I thought it would kill you." "It nearly did," she said, brushing dust from Heidi's hair. He dismounted and knelt beside them. "Name's Judson Flynn. My ranch is east, past the river. You need somewhere safe." Hollis hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Hollis Fairburn. This is Heidi." Heidi peeked out from under Hollis's coat and gave a little wave. Judson smiled. It was a slow, honest smile that reached his eyes. He helped them onto his horse, steady hands guiding Hollis up first, then lifting Heidi into her arms. He walked beside them the whole way back, never once trying to take the reins from her. The ranch was tucked into a shallow valley, shielded from the worst of the wind. His house was solid, built from thick timber and stone, with a wide porch and the smell of smoke and coffee curling from the chimney. Judson opened the door for her, motioned her inside. "I'll get some water heated," he said. "You both look like you could use it." Later, once the child was fed, warm, and asleep in the guest room, Hollis sat at his kitchen table staring into her cup. "You did not have to help," she said quietly. "I know," he said, pouring her more coffee. "But I wanted to." She looked up. "Why?" Judson leaned on the table, forearms bare, eyes steady. "Because I saw the kind of woman who'd run into a storm for someone else's child. And I would be a fool not to want to know her." Hollis stared at him, heart thudding hard in her chest. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." "You risked your life for a girl you never met. You held her like she was yours. That tells me more than a name ever could." The room went quiet. Outside, the wind was gone. Only the creak of the porch swing moved. For the first time in years, Hollis felt safe. Heidi stirred in the other room, and Hollis stood. I should stay nearby. Make sure she sleeps. Judson nodded. You can have the room beside hers. Stay as long as you need. She turned to go, then paused. Thank you, Judson. He gave her that same honest smile. Any time, Hollis. And when she walked down the hallway with Heidi's small hand in hers, she did not feel like a stranger anymore. The next morning brought the hush that follows destruction. No birdsong, no far-off cattle lowing. Just sunlight stretching across broken prairie and the occasional creak of wood settling after too much wind. Hollis stood at the edge of the porch, one hand resting lightly on the railing, the other clutching a mug that had long gone cold. Her boots were caked in yesterday's earth. Her coat hung limp from where she'd washed the dust from it at first light. Heidi sat cross-legged nearby with a wooden doll Judson had quietly fetched from the loft and set beside her at breakfast, saying only, "Used to belong to my sister." Hollis had nodded, not asking what had become of her. Judson came around from the barn, wiping his hands on a length of linen. He paused when he saw Hollis, then stepped up beside her. Fence lines down along the west trail. Neighbors lost a roof. Yours is still standing, mostly. He glanced over, gauging her reaction. I was never fond of that roof, Hollis said, voice dry, but her eyes didn't quite meet his. It always leaked in spring. He studied her a beat longer. You plan on going back today? I need to. There are things I'll have to tend to. She tilted her head slightly toward Heidi. But I can't take her into that. I'll stay with her, he said without pause. She knows me enough not to be afraid. Hollis looked at him then, truly looked. You sure? He gave a simple nod. You trust me. I do. She left that afternoon riding Judson's second horse while he stayed behind with the child. Her own mare had torn a leg and gone lame, and he hadn't so much as hesitated before offering one of his. When she returned that evening, the sun already low, she found Heidi in a makeshift fort of hay bales with a tin plate of cornbread crumbs and a wide grin. Judson sat cross-legged across from her, nodding solemnly as she explained something with great seriousness about the doll's hat. Later, as Heidi slept in a pallet by the hearth, Hollis sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around fresh coffee. Judson leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching the flames. She didn't cry once, he said after a while. Just asked if you'd come back. I wasn't sure I would, Hollis admitted quietly. The house isn't worth much now. Roof split, pantry collapsed. I gathered what I could, but it's not a place for a child anymore. He shifted, turning toward her. And if someone offered you a place that was? She looked up, unsure what he meant, or perhaps too sure. Judson, I know you haven't decided anything yet, and I'm not asking you to, but I want you to know there's room here. For both of you. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. You're kind. Too kind. I'm not offering this out of charity. I know, she whispered. He stepped closer, slow, like approaching a wild animal. When he reached her side, he didn't touch her, just sat down across from her, close enough to speak low. I saw something in you that day. Not just courage. It was the way you looked at her. Like she mattered more than your own life. I've known folk my whole life who wouldn't lift a hand for their own blood, let alone a stranger. She exhaled, lids heavy with weariness she hadn't dared show until now. I was raised by someone like that. I figured, he said, not asking more. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't press but filled the space like warm cloth. Outside, the wind had softened to a breeze. The prairie, battered but alive, was already beginning to stand again. I don't know what's next, she said finally. I'm not asking you to know. Just stay a while. Let things settle. She looked over at him, and this time there wasn't distance in her eyes. I could do that. He nodded once. Good. Neither of them said anything more. But when Hollis rose and gathered the blanket from the back of the chair to drape over Heidi, Judson took her empty cup and set it in the basin without being asked. And when she turned back, she found him waiting, not in the way of someone hoping for a reward, but like a man steady enough to hold space until she was ready to fill it. She didn't speak, just looked at him, long enough that something unspoken passed between them. Something like a beginning. By the time May gave way to early June, the land had begun to breathe again. Green shoots threaded through the scorched soil, and the air held the heavy, damp smell of new growth. Judson's ranch had taken less damage than most, and though the storm had scattered fence rails and gouged deep scars in the earth, he'd already begun the work of mending. Hollis helped where she could quietly, capably splitting her time between small repairs and tending to Heidi, who followed her like a shadow now, thumb tucked into the hem of Hollis's skirt more often than not. Judson didn't press. He noticed things, though how Hollis moved through the world like someone who didn't expect a space to be hers. How she paused before accepting anything freely given. He gave her tasks instead of kindness, and she stayed. One warm afternoon, Hollis carried a tin pail of water from the well while Heidi napped. Judson was kneeling by the corral, elbow deep in a broken gate hinge. His shirt clung to him with sweat, collar open, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She stopped just behind him and set the pail down. "Your west fence is leaning again," she said. "I know," he replied without looking up. "I keep hauling it upright and the ground keeps trying to swallow it. Maybe the posts are rotted." "Likely." He stood then, testing the weight on his leg before brushing dirt from his hands. "I haven't had time to replace them. I could help." His gaze landed on her, thoughtful rather than surprised. "You know how to drive posts?" "I do." He nodded slowly. "Reckon I'd welcome the help." They worked until dusk. She held the post steady while he swung the sledge. The rhythm between them was easy, unspoken. At one point, Judson paused and handed her a flask of rainwater. She drank, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and passed it back without a word. He watched her for a beat, then returned to work. Later, when the sky turned the color of cooled ash, they sat on the porch steps and shared a plate of beans and cornbread. Heidi leaned against Hollis's hip, half asleep, crumbs on her chin. A whippoorwill called somewhere near the riverbank. "You were right," Judson said quietly. "The posts were no good. They'd been patched too many times. They weren't meant to last." He looked over at her, studying her profile in the fading light. "Neither was I once." She didn't answer, but her breath caught just slightly. "My father," he said after a moment, "took off when I was 7. Left my ma with 2 kids and a winter that near starved us. I figured I'd leave too once I was old enough. But my sister got sick and then it didn't feel right to go." Hollis turned toward him, her face unreadable. "She's buried up in the north pasture," he went on. "Took her doll out the day she died and said it should stay where it could still see the sky." Hollis reached out, brushing her fingers along Heidi's braid. "I never had a sister. Did you have anyone?" She hesitated, then gave a single shake of her head. "A woman took me in once. She meant well, but she had too many mouths and not enough bread. I left before I became another burden. You were a child. I was 16. Judson's jaw shifted, but he didn't speak. "I took work where I could. Learned to bake, so mend. I never stayed long. Folks like me don't last anywhere. You're still here. I don't know why." He set his plate aside, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Maybe because this place doesn't ask you to be anything but what you are." She glanced at him, eyes wary. "And what am I?" "Capable, careful, braver than sense, and kind in ways that don't make noise." She looked away, not because she disagreed, but because no one had ever said such things aloud, and it rattled something loose under her ribs. "I don't need someone to save me," she said quietly. "I know," he said just as quietly. "But I'd still stand beside you if you let me." The porch creaked beneath them. Heidi stirred and blinked up at Hollis, who brushed a thumb across the girl's cheek and gathered her in her arms. "I should put her to bed." Judson stood and opened the door for her. Hollis stepped past him, pausing just long enough to meet his eyes. "I'm not used to people meaning what they say." "Then I'll say it again until you are." She nodded once, carried Heidi inside, and didn't look back. That night, as the wind stirred through the cottonwoods and the lantern burned low, Judson lay awake staring at the ceiling. He could still feel the press of her presence beside him, the quiet steadiness of her hands, the way her voice held no apology when she claimed her place in the world. He didn't know when she'd choose to stay for good, but he knew he'd keep building something worth staying for. The first rain since the tornado came gentle, soaking into soil still clawed raw by wind. It started at dusk, a fine mist that deepened the color of the fields and left the porch steps slick. Hollis stood beneath the eaves, sleeves rolled, watching the drops carve tiny rivers through the dust. Heidi was asleep inside, curled on a quilt Judson's mother had stitched before her hands went arthritic. Judson emerged from the barn with his hat in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. He stopped short when he saw her, the rain catching on his shirt and darkening it across the collar. "I was hoping it'd hold off another day," he said, setting the rope down and stepping under the cover beside her. "You got hay stored dry." She glanced at his boots. "And your tacks hung proper. There's not much left to do." He looked over. "You been keeping track? I notice things." "I know you do." She didn't look at him, but he caught the edge of a smile in her cheek before she turned away again. The field beyond the fence shimmered with water, the tall grass bent like softened bone. "You ever want more than this?" she asked. "This? Land, stock, the same days strung together." He leaned a shoulder against the post. "I used to think I did. When I was younger, I wanted to see Denver. Maybe farther. Thought if I kept writing, I'd find something better than what my father left behind." "And did you?" He shook his head, rain tapping the brim of his hat. "Never got farther than Dodge. Didn't like who I was becoming there. A man's soul can rot in places too loud to hear it." She was quiet a long moment. "I thought about Chicago once. Near took a job in a boarding house kitchen, but the woman who hired me died before I got there. Her brother sent a telegram, said it wasn't proper for a stranger to take her place." Judson's jaw tightened. "That's a hard way to be told you're not wanted." It wasn't the first time. He turned to face her then, his voice low but sure. "You are now." She looked up, eyes sharp with something unspoken. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything." He stepped closer, not touching her. "Just don't run from it." The rain thickened around them, warm and steady. Hollis reached out slowly and took the hat from his hand, set it on the porch rail. Her fingers lingered, wet from the mist. She didn't step back. "You've built a life here," she said. "A good one." "So have you." "I didn't mean to. Most good things start that way." He was close enough now for her to feel the warmth of him beneath the damp. Still, he didn't reach for her. Instead, he waited. "I keep expecting you to change your mind," she said. "I won't. You don't even know what I'm carrying." "I don't need to." She reached out then, slowly, and laid her hand flat against his chest. His shirt was soaked through and she could feel the steady beat beneath her palm. He didn't move for a long time. Then, gently, he covered her hand with his. Inside, the fire snapped once, distant and low. "I'm not asking for forever," she said. "I am," he replied. She let out a soft breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You're a fool." He smiled, eyes steady. "Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool with you here than smart and alone." She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. He let her stay there as long as she needed. When she finally pulled back, the rain had slowed to a whisper. The sky had gone pale with the last light of day, and the fields beyond the fence shimmered like silver. Hollis took his hand and led him inside. Neither of them spoke, but something had shifted between them, something quiet, certain, and whole. And when Heidi woke that night from a bad dream and called out, it was Judson who rose first, steady and barefoot, to sit beside her until she fell asleep again. Hollis watched from the doorway, arms folded, eyes soft. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, something new had begun. The wheat in Judson's lower field came in early that year, thick and gold and taller than a man's waist. It was the first sign the land had forgiven the storm. Hollis walked the edge of the field with Heidi one morning, the girl weaving between stalks like a rabbit, her laughter low so as not to wake the bees. The wind lifted Hollis's skirt hem and cooled the back of her neck, and for the first time in years, she felt no urge to leave. At the house, Judson was laying stone for a new hearth. He'd taken to rising before the sun and working until the light gave out, sometimes with Hollis beside him, sometimes with Heidi handing him nails or small tools and asking endless questions he answered with patient honesty. He hadn't asked Hollis again what she'd decided. He didn't need to. One afternoon, she found him fitting the final stones, his knees streaked with grit and sweat darkening his collar. She watched for a time, then crouched beside him and ran her fingers along the smooth edge of the hearth. "You built this like you meant it to last." "I did." She nodded, brushing dust from her palm. "You ever think about building more?" He set the trowel down. "What kind of more?" "Enough for 3. Maybe 4 someday." He looked at her then, and there was no surprise in his face, only a quiet steadiness. "I would if you asked." "I am." He sat back, elbows on his knees, and let the silence settle around them for a moment before speaking. "You sure, Hollis?" "I'm tired of waiting for places to feel like home," she said. "This one already does." He reached for her hand then, rough fingers closing around hers. "Then you stay, and we'll build it together." The next week brought a letter from a circuit judge in Abilene. Judson rode in 2 days later and returned with a folded document and a clean-cut solemnity about him. He handed the paper to Hollis by the porch steps. "Custody transfer," he said. "Legal and witnessed. You're hers now. Full and fair." She held the paper like it might vanish. "But I never you did," he said gently. "The moment you carried her out of that house. This just catches up." Heidi came barreling around the corner with a "son had asked you" and her hands full of wild onions. Hollis tucked the paper against her chest and opened her arms. The following Sunday, under the cottonwoods behind the barn, they were married. No guests save Heidi, who clutched a posy of clover and yarrow and wore a ribbon Judson had found in the back of a drawer. The preacher came from a ranch 2 ridges over, and his voice was deep and sure. Hollis wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself, and her hands didn't tremble when she placed them in Judson's. Their vows were simple, promises made without flourish, only truth. When the preacher spoke the last words, Judson kissed her with a care that said he'd never take her for granted, not one day in his life. That night, with Heidi tucked in her small bed near the kitchen and the fire burning low, Hollis stood by the window, watching moonlight spill across the pasture. Judson came up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You ever think," she said, "how strange it is we ended up here?" "Strange," he said, "and exactly right." She turned in his arms, resting her forehead against his. "I don't want a life made of waiting anymore." "You won't have one," he said. "Not here. Not with me." She kissed him then, soft and sure, and when he lifted her into his arms, she let herself be held without shame or hesitation. They moved together with the ease of people who had already chosen each other, who didn't need permission to belong. The days that followed were slow, sweet, and full of work. They expanded the garden, built a henhouse, and repaired the old smokehouse. Judson taught Heidi how to hold a fishing rod, and Hollis taught her to knead biscuit dough without overworking it. Each night, they gathered at the table, 3 chairs now, and talked over what had been done and what might come tomorrow. One evening near the end of summer, Judson carved Hollis's name into the lintel above the doorway. She watched from the top stair. Heidi nestled against her side and said nothing, only smiled. Years passed, and the porch grew soft with wear. The hearth never cracked. The wheat grew tall each season, the barn held firm, and the house stood steady through every storm. Heidi grew into a girl with strong hands and a quick tongue, as fearless as the woman who raised her. And Hollis, once a woman who never stayed, woke each day beside the man who never asked her to be anything but herself. She loved him with the quiet, rooted certainty of someone who had finally come home. They grew old in that house together. And they were happy.